Hello fellow 3D enthusiast, my name is Ian, and today I wanted to share with you something that I learned very recently about tracking that is kind of embarrassing, and I figured if I didn't know it for so long, maybe you don't know it, so might as well share it with you. Today I'm going to be going over motion models, and you can see that setting up here in the side panel. Just a quick reminder, if you're tracking through and your track loses the marker, then you can always switch motion models in this panel for the individual marker. But anyways, the default setting for motion model is location. And you can see we have a whole bunch of different models that we can use here. And I'm just going to walk you through these real quick. Let's start with the basic default one. It's just location. You're tracking a certain point. And the data that Blender uses to figure out how something is moving is usually just in single points. But the idea of using a different motion model is that we can track those points better. For example, if we are trying to track this little crack in my hand, you can see at this point, it is kind of at a 45-degree angle, and then it moves to the start, and this is a little bit more up and down. So if we were just tracking this with location, it could pretty easily lose the track since it's rotating. Because if you'll remember, this little image up here is what Blender is looking for. And when it switches to something closer to an angle, that's no longer quite as much what Blender is looking for. So if we switch our tracking method to rotation and location, if we track it forwards, you can see if we lock our view to it with L, our track is rotating along with our tracking marker. And you can see it does lose it here, but that's probably not because of the rotation. Okay, so that's rotation and location. Rotation, location, and scale is when your tracking marker is also changing size. We could go to a good example of that in a different file here. Maybe I'm trying to track this thing here, and as we play through the animation, you can see it's starting to change size a little bit. It's getting bigger as the camera is getting closer. And so if we use a model that's location, rotation, and scale, then if we just scale up our pattern size a little bit, as we track it, it scales differently. And I'll get into keyframes a little bit later, but here's the basics. You can see there's a bit of a yellow bar along the bottom here, and there's this bright yellow point, and that is where we place down the marker. And Blender is always looking for this image here, and so once we get to a point where it's farther away, it looks a bit different, and that's when it loses its track. But since we have our tracker scaling up, it's a lot harder for Blender to lose the track because our pattern is staying the same. Okay, so that's rotation, location, and scale. Affine and perspective are kind of similar. If you have a surface that's slanting instead of just scaling up and rotating and moving around, then your pattern can start to look a bit skewed. So let's do a quick example of an affine track. There's this nice bracket here that we could also try tracking. The cool thing about affine is you can actually scale it in different directions. So if we just scale it on the x-axis by going S and X, then our tracker will warp to this marker here. And if we go ahead and track it forward, you can see an example of that. Oh no, this is getting bad. As it moves into the edge of the frame, it's not tracking very well. But you can see, unlike our rotation, location, and scale track, which is just scaling up as it gets bigger, this is also scaling sideways and vertically, which isn't the best scenario in this case, but that should demonstrate it. And then we've also got a perspective track, which this footage isn't a very good example of, but it's a similar idea. It will track the perspective of your marker. And just to sum up the whole idea of this video, Blender isn't tracking the location and scale of a point. It's still just trying to figure out where this point is and stick to that point. And if we can rotate and scale the tracking marker to better figure out where that point is, then that will serve us better. So if you want to see a visualization of this, I've tracked this scene completely, and you can see all the markers here are going crazy, but what Blender is seeing is just this, a bunch of dots. And you can see how Blender might be able to figure out how the camera is moving because of these dots, which is super cool. I just love looking at this and seeing how it makes kind of a 3D scene. Okay, so that is motion models in a nutshell, just ways that trackers can work better to figure out where a certain point is. And once again, this was kind of a breakthrough for me. I've always just been tracking with location, and I knew the other models existed, but I didn't really know what for, which is silly of me. I really should have figured this out sooner. But yeah, just trying to share the information, spread it around so other people are not as ignorant as I am. Now if you found this useful and you're interested in learning more about visual effects in Blender, I've created a completely free video for you that goes over 5 tips for integrating your CG creations into real-life footage. And if that sounds interesting to you, there's a link in the description, so go ahead and give that a click. But hey, we're at the end of the video here, so I hope you have an excellent day, and cheers!